It is 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock Central Time. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture's Grant Support Technical Assistance webinar series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alicia Shipley. I am the Capacity Program Leader in the Office of Director, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I am joined by Narun Nahar, our Zoom host. On today's agenda, there will be a mock panel reflecting NIFA's peer review process, followed by a question and answer session. Next, there will be a presentation on tips for NIFA's competitive grants application, followed by a Q&A session. Then we will close out with an open session for questions and answers. I want to remind everyone to please put your questions in the question and answer box rather than in the chat box. Additionally, the presentations today and yesterday are posted online in the workshop's website, and they are available both in English and Spanish. So before we get started with the presentations, I would like to introduce Dr. Suzanne Sluka to give remarks on behalf of agency leadership. Dr. Sluka.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone to the second day of the USDA NIFA Grant Support Technical Assistance Workshop. So as was mentioned, I am Suzanne Sluka, and my role at NIFA is the Deputy Director for the Institute of Food Safety and Nutrition, where we work on priorities related to keeping the food supply safe and also advancing food and nutrition security. When I reflected on what to highlight during this welcome, I thought about how less than just 3 years ago, I was sitting in your role. For 15 years, I worked at smaller land-grant universities where I continuously was writing grants to support extension, education, and research activities. I remember how important these workshops were to me in that role, and they gave me the confidence to know that I could prepare applications that could compete on a national level. But you know what I found the most valuable to my participation was really the connection to NIFA staff. So I encourage you to reach out, get to know us, get to know our staff, make that personal connection. There are so many others just like me now at NIFA who have sat in your roles, and I just really wanted to lift that up and show you the support and understanding that we have for all of you. We know just how many hours and late nights went into finally being able to hit that submit button, and the celebration, the little happy dances that take place when you receive that email confirmation that it actually went through. We know those joys of being notified that your project has been funded. And we also know and have experienced those various emotions that go along with finding out that you've not been funded. And so all of us at NIFA are here for you along that entire trajectory. And so that is why we are thrilled to bring you these workshops today. And I just must thank again our NIFA staff who have put in many hours behind the scenes leading up to these presentations that are being shared with you today and throughout the rest of the week. They are truly invested in helping all of you to succeed in your grant writing efforts. So we are honored to have your attendance during these webinars, and we look forward to helping you to advance your technical knowledge in preparing your grant and funding applications. So again, please reach out to us. We're here for you, and have a great training.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sluka, for those warm and encouraging remarks. So now we're going to get started with the first segment of day 2, which is a pre-recorded video of a mock panel comprised of the best of NIFA's critically acclaimed colleagues. I want to provide a few notes before we get started. You will hear the term fake and fictitious when referring to applications from different folks in the panel, which means the content has either been created or adapted and is not submitted by real applicants because NIFA maintains confidentiality in this regard. Additionally, information presented during the webinar is the most current information at the time. Whenever applying for a grant opportunity, please verify the RFA language before submitting an application, as that information is the most accurate and legally binding document. So we'll go ahead and get started. Nurin, please start the video.
Good day. Welcome to the National Institute of Food and Agriculture's Grant Support Technical Assistance Workshop. My name is Cal Kalavacharla, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. In today's webinar, where we will provide
Hold on just one moment. We are working through some technical issues. Thank you for your patience.
Good day. Welcome to the National Institute of Food and Agriculture's Grant Support Technical Assistance Workshop. My name is Cal Kalavacharla, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. In today's webinar, where we will provide an opportunity for a behind-the-scenes look into how NIFA conducts its peer review panels. Using real NIFA staff who have wide experiences with this process, we will explain the roles of various members of the panel, and we will show you the reviews of 3 fake applications, one that was ranked higher, one that has some merit, and one that was ranked lower. Here's our disclaimer. The characters, projects, and comments in this mock panel are fictitious. Any resemblance to persons or plants is purely coincidental, and we are not professional actors. Next slide, please. USDA is an equal opportunity employer, provider, and lender. This slide contains contact information for individuals with disabilities to request reasonable accommodations. Language access services will be provided to limited English proficient individuals upon request, and anyone wishing to file a complaint can utilize the phone number, fax number, or postal mailing address listed on this slide. In the next slide, I'll provide an overview of the composition of the actual NIFA panels and our commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Next slide, please. NIFA staff aim to assemble a diverse panel active in research, education, and/or extension related to the subject matter in question. The goal is to create a balanced panel with the necessary expertise to cover the range of the applications while also maintaining diversity in geographical location, institution size and type, professional rank, gender, and ethnicity.
Thank you.
Yeah, now is good. You can continue.
We still need the ASL interpreters pinned. Thank you. Noreen, we can go ahead and start again.
Programs also strive to have continuity on the panel from previous years by inviting at least 30% of the panelists to return for a subsequent year. The integrity of competitive programs depends upon the fairness and scientific skill of each panelist as they provide careful review and evaluation of the submitted applications. To maintain fairness and objectivity, panelists are not formally introduced prior to the panel. When panelists are assigned applications to review, a pre-panel orientation is conducted by NIFA staff to provide a brief overview of the program and specific instructions for reviewing applications. Panelists are not allowed to disclose to anyone that they are serving on a NIFA panel before the panel convenes. One final point before we begin. Please keep in mind that today we're enacting a very abbreviated panel due to time constraints and have cut out some of the technical language that would be discussed in an actual panel. And now it's time for the show to begin. Action.
Welcome to the NIFA peer review panel for the fiscal year 2023 Competitive Grants Program. I am Dr. Jody Williams, and I'm one of the national program leaders, also referred to as the NPL, who is responsible for managing this program. I am a great resource for inquiries from anyone interested in submitting an application to the program. As the NPL, my role today will be to provide an orientation to discuss the panel process and to answer any questions about the request for applications, also referred to as the RFA, and any general programmatic questions. During the meeting, I will observe and take notes on the discussions, and I'll be available for the duration of the meeting to address any questions about the RFA. Here with us today, we have our colleague, Dr. Bob Godfrey, another national program leader managing this grant program. He will also be helping to facilitate the panel today. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jody. Hi, I'm Bob Godfrey, and I'm glad to be here with you all today. Thank you for your service in NIFA's peer review process.
Thanks, Bob. Now I'd like to introduce the other members of this team before we go over the schedule and expectation for today's panel. Let's start with the panel manager, Dr. Pascal Jean.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pascal Jean, and I'll be serving as the panel manager for the peer review panel. I'm a temporary part-time NIFA employee. I previously served as a food safety and nutrition educator working with underserved communities. Much of my work is done before the panel meeting, arranging logistics, recruiting panelists, and assigning application to panelists. Today, I will be facilitating the panel discussion and helping to keep things on task. I'll go ahead and hand it back to Jody.
Thanks, Pascal. Next, we'll ask Tammy Neville to introduce herself. Tammy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tammy Neville. I'm a program specialist at NIFA, working with Jody and Bob to help coordinate this virtual panel meeting. I am the contact person should you have any issues with NIFA's online peer review system, also called PRS, that allows you to view the applications and submit your reviews and panel summaries. Throughout the panel meeting, I will be helping with the logistics of the discussion and sharing my screen to facilitate the ranking process by positioning applications in the desired categories. I'll also help to arrange a waiting room for panelists who have a conflict of interest with any application being discussed. Jody will talk more about that in a little bit. Back to you, Jody.
Thank you, Tammy. Another member of the NIFA team is the program assistant, who could not be here with us today. This person helps to coordinate travel arrangements for in-person meetings and to process your honorarium. So be sure to respond to those emails and phone calls if you want to get your money on time. I'd like to go over a few things before we get started. Next slide, please. So why are we here? The purpose of this panel is to enhance the review process by enabling rigorous discussion of the applications by a larger group of experts with the goal of reaching consensus on the rank order of the applications based on merit. Prior to today's panel, you have used the evaluation criteria from the RFA to provide your individual reviews of the applications you were assigned. And we ask that you continue to reference the RFA and evaluation criteria throughout the discussions today. I want to reiterate that the role of NIFA staff and the panel managers is to help answer questions and facilitate the discussions today. And we will not be involved in the reviewing or ranking of applications. Next slide, please. The NIFA Competitive Grants Program supports research, education, and extension or outreach by soliciting the following types of projects: research, education, extension, and integrated. Integrated projects include a combination of the previous three types. Next slide, please. The review process should be fair, respectful, and confidential. Please remain objective. Be aware of the potential biases, and be sure to reference the program RFA and evaluation criteria. Make decisions based on reliable information within the application. Next slide, please. In the pre-panel orientation that was held before you reviewed your assigned applications, we discussed the situations that represent a conflict of interest, or COI, regarding individual assignments and reviews of applications. Please remember, it is extremely important for us to maintain all COI rules during this panel review. You have a conflict of interest if you are from the institution as the project director, PD, or key personnel of an application. You have been a co-author of a publication or a collaborator on a project with the PD or co-personnel within the past 3 years, and/or you have a family member or close personal relationship with the PD or key personnel on a project. There is a lifetime conflict of interest between theses or postdoctoral advisees and advisors. As Tammy mentioned earlier, if you have a conflict of interest for a specific application, you will be placed in the virtual waiting room prior to the discussion of that application. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Godfrey to explain the panel discussion process. Bob, take us away.
Thank you, Jody. In a typical discussion, each application will be discussed for 12 minutes. Today, we have an abbreviated discussion. Panelist 1 will provide an overview of the application, outline the strengths and weaknesses, and give their initial rating of the application. Panelists 2 and 3 will then have an opportunity to mention anything that may have been left out and express agreement or disagreement with the thoughts mentioned by other panelists. Then the discussion will be open to the entire panel. After all comments have been made, the assigned panelists will come to a consensus on where the application will be placed on the ranking board, and panelist 1 will begin the panel summary in PRS. Next slide, please. Prior to today's panel meeting, you provided your initial individual review ratings of excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor for the applications you were assigned to review. Today, the panel will come to consensus on the final rankings of each application in the categories of outstanding, high priority, medium priority, low priority, or do not fund. An application must be placed in the outstanding, high, or medium priority categories to be considered fundable. Applications placed in the low priority or do not fund categories are not considered fundable by NIFA. Next slide, please. After the panel discussion, the assigned panelists for that application will decide where to place the application on the ranking board. After all the applications have been placed on the ranking board, the entire panel will engage in the re-ranking process. During this process, panelists will discuss if applications are placed in the correct column and row within each column. Next slide, please. After the discussion has concluded and the application is placed on the ranking board, panelist 1, the designated scribe, will begin writing a panel summary in the peer review system to summarize strengths, weaknesses, and general comments from the panel discussion. Panelists 2 and 3 will review the summary and make edits as needed. Then panelist 1 will finalize and submit the final version to NIFA. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Jody to take any questions.
Thanks, Bob. Does anyone have any questions before we get started today?
Yes, I have a question about the ranking board. Can you tell me where an application would have to be placed on the ranking board to get funded?
That's a great question. Funding decisions are not discussed in the panel meeting. The focus is on assessing and rating applications based on scientific and technical merit. Fundable applications must be ranked in the medium priority category or above.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'll pass it back over to Dr. Jean.
Thanks, Jody. Let's move forward with a brief introduction. Next slide. I want to thank everyone for volunteering your time and expertise to serve on this NIFA panel. When I call your name, please briefly introduce yourself in 30 seconds or less by stating your name, institution or organization, and your area of expertise. Remember to be brief. Let's start with Logan Appenfeller.
Hi, everyone. I'm Logan Appenfeller, and I'm an assistant professor of community development and environment at People Cooperative University, which is an 1890 institution. Thank you.
Thanks, Logan. Let's move to Dr. Kellyanne Jones Jentgard.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kellyanne Jones Jentgard, and I'm an associate professor of nutrition and food safety from USA Field University, which is an 1862 institution.
Great. Next, we have Dr. Nirja Tyagi.
Hi all, I'm Nirja Tyagi, and I'm an extension specialist with ABC University, which is a non-land grant institution. My area of expertise is community partnerships and emerging audiences. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Great. Dr. Lynn Elliston Giddings, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Lynn Elliston Giddings, and I'm a research specialist focusing on dairy food and food safety at XYZ University, a 1994 institution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Cassandra Huey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassandra Huey, and I'm an environmental scientist at USDA. My expertise is in climate change and its impact on food production. Thank you.
Great. And last but not least, we have Dr. Adam Wilkie.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adam Wilkie, and I'm an expert in food safety from Eagles Center for Excellence, which is a center for nonprofits and industry.
Freeze. Hello, everyone. My name is Cal Kalavacharla, and I will serve as the moderator for this session today. And I will be jumping in just like I did just now to emphasize important points, which we will call learning moments during today's panel. These learning moments are designed to bring some insights and consideration to help you prepare strong applications. So I will be freezing and unfreezing the panel. Unfreeze.
At this time, we'll begin the review of application number 13897. We have two conflicts of interest for this application. So at this time, Cassandra Huey, you will be in the waiting room for the duration of the discussion. And Jody, you also have a COI with this application. So Bob will be stepping in to take notes and answer programmatic questions during this discussion. Tammy, please go ahead and put Cassandra and Jody in the virtual waiting room.
So let me jump in for a second here as the moderator. When you actually have the panel in real life, when we are reviewing our proposals, the panel members who have conflicts of interest will actually go off camera and they will be moved into a waiting room. This is a recording for us, so we are going to have them just go off camera for demonstration purposes.
Thank you, Cal. They have both been moved out of the meeting room and into the waiting room. So Dr. Jean, we can progress.
Okay, great. The title of this application is Enhancing Food Safety During the Super Bowl Through Education, Extension, and Outreach. And it was submitted from USA Field University. The PD is Patrick Mahomes. For this application, panelist 1 who will also serve as a scribe and take notes during the discussion is Logan Appenfeller. Panelist 2 is Nija Tiagi, and panelist 3 is Adam Wilkie. The project type for this application is community outreach, and it is a resubmission. The project period is for 2 years, and the total amount of funding requested is $1 million. Logan rated this application as excellent. Nirja gave it a rating of very good, and Adam rated it as good. I'll be handing things off to Logan to provide the summary and his preliminary ratings for this application. And I request the panelists be mindful of the time as we have lots of applications to go through before we break for lunch.
Okay, thank you. Well, to start off, the overall goal of this project is to enhance food safety education by developing a collaborative infrastructure in the Midwest for delivering education, training, and technical assistance to community partners. I noted several strengths with this application. The impacts presented in the application are realistic and the goals align with this program's objectives. With this being a resubmission, the applicant's responses to the previous panelists' comments adequately address the concerns raised by the previous panelists. Another substantial strength of the application is their plan to establish partnerships with community-based non-governmental organizations and community members with lived experiences in the planning and execution of the project. The timeline is detailed and seems reasonable to achieve the proposed objectives as well. The planned education and outreach activities focus on customizing food safety education programs to address the specific needs of the communities that will serve. And this is an important focus of the community outreach project type that was outlined in the program's RFA. As far as weaknesses, the authors proposed to purchase a significant amount of equipment, and I wasn't clear about what types of equipment are appropriate for purchasing.
I can provide some clarification from page 6 of the RFA. In quote, it says, equipment purchases are allowable for most NIFA programs if they're well justified and aligned with the overall project's goals and objectives. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Given this information, I view the equipment as aligned with the objectives of the project, and I think it will help achieve the project goals. I view that as another strength of the project overall. One critique I have for this application is the narrative is too dense, I would have liked to see some tables or figures to break things up and summarize important points.
Let me freeze the panel one more time. It's time for our first learning moment. We can learn an important lesson from Logan's last comment about the project narrative. You will want to make sure your project narrative is clear and concise, and including tables and figures is one way to achieve that goal. Keep in mind that panelists are assigned 10 to 12 applications to review, and you want to make things easier for them to follow. Unfreeze.
So to summarize, overall, I thought this was a very strong application and I gave it a rating of excellent.
Okay, Logan has rated this application as excellent. We'll now hand it over to panelist 2, Nirja.
I agree with many of the first panelist's comments, so I won't repeat all the strengths he has listed. I thought that objectives were clear and the evaluation plan seemed adequate and reasonable for measuring project outcomes. As far as the weaknesses, I thought that budget was not well justified. The travel costs are not realistically described, but this is a minor flaw that can be changed. I'm not very familiar with the specifics of the novel conservation methods proposed in the objective 2, so it was difficult for me to assess this objective was reasonable given the highly technical description provided.
Let me freeze the panel again. Let's take a timeout for a learning moment. It is important to keep in mind that while many of the panelists will be familiar with the technical language in your field, there will also be panelists who are not as familiar with the specifics of your topic of study. You want to write in a way that is clear and can be understood and assessed by a range of levels and areas of expertise. Unfreeze.
All things considered, I thought that strengths outweighed the weaknesses of this application, and therefore I rated it as very good.
Thank you, Nirja. We'll go ahead and give Adam the floor.
Well, I have to say that I'm not even sure we were reading the same application. I have a very different perspective on many of the things mentioned by my colleagues. A big concern of mine is the institutional commitment to partnerships. I have worked with other collaborators from USA Field University, and I know from my previous experience that the institution does not commit sufficient resources for partnerships.
I'd like to jump in here to remind all panel members that we must evaluate all applications based on the criteria given in the RFA and the grant application as submitted. Prior knowledge of information outside of the application should be kept out of the review process. Also, please consider all the evaluation criteria and not just one of the few items.
Thank you, Dr. John. I had another concern with the cost effectiveness of the budget, and I think the budget justification is lacking important details.
Let me freeze the panel one more time. Here is yet another learning moment. When preparing the budget, be sure to provide a strong justification. If your budget justification is lacking details, then panelists are not able to adequately assess the reasonableness or cost effectiveness, and that may negatively impact your rating. Unfreeze.
Well, considering my concerns, I rated this application as good.
Okay, Adam has rated this application as good.
Can I jump in to respond to the concerns about the budget? I have to disagree with Adam here. I think that the budget request is reasonable considering the large number of collaborators included in the project. The team also thoughtfully provided equal compensation for all members of their community advisory board.
Okay, thank you both for this robust discussion. At this time, we'll go ahead and open the discussion for the rest of the panel if anyone would like to add something that hasn't already been discussed. Hearing none, this concludes the panel discussion for this application. Tammy, could you please display the ranking board? Let's talk about the placement of this application within the funding category of the ranking board. Logan, you are the primary panelist for this application. Can you please place this on the ranking board?
Sure. I thought that this was a very strong application with only a few minor weaknesses, and I would place this in the upper portion of high priority.
Okay. Do others with this are okay with this placement?
Despite some minor flaws, I think this is a great application and I would place it in the middle of high priority.
Okay, Adam, what are your thoughts?
Well, although I had initially rated this application as good, after listening to the points raised by the other panelists, I'd like to change my rating to very good. However, given my concerns with the budget, I would feel more comfortable placing this application in the upper portion of medium.
Hi, everyone. This is Tammy jumping in. Please remember that if you decide to change your individual rating system after discussion, then you'll have to make that change in the peer review system as well. I can help if anybody needs any guidance on how to make that change in PRS. Please send me a message in the chat.
Thank you, Tammy, for your help. This is interesting. It looks like we have different rankings for this application, the high priority column and the medium priority column. Other panelists, what do you think is the most appropriate ranking for this application?
I was not assigned as a panelist for this application, so I've not read it in detail. However, I have expertise and experience in the project area. Hearing these panelist summaries and some of the discussion here, this application sounds very innovative. I'd agree to place it in the middle of the high priority category.
Thank you for your thoughts, Lynn. Panelists, we need to conclude here. We have many more applications to go. Logan, after hearing the input from everyone, where would you like to place this application?
I agree with Lynn. I think we can go with the middle of high priority.
Are you all in agreement with the middle of high priority placement for this application?
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I suppose I can live with that.
Okay. This concludes the panel review for this application. Tammy, can you please move the application over to the middle portion of high priority? Let's bring Cassandra and Jody back from the COI waiting room.
Did you bring any snacks back?
No snacks, sorry.
The next application to review is application number 12457. Logan has a COI and will be placed in the waiting room. I also have a COI with this application, so both NPLs will facilitate discussion, and it's my turn to get some snack.
All right, thanks, Pascal. Tammy, do we have the COIs moved over to the waiting room?
Yes, we do, Jody. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. Great. The title of the next project is Developing Community Partnerships to Address Common Food Safety Concerns, and the PD is Dr. Pitmaster from the University of Burnt Ends. The panelists assigned to review this application are Nirja Tyagi as panelist 1, Lynn Elliston-Giddings as panelist 2, and Cassandra Huey as panelist 3. This is a collaborative education and training application with a project period of 3 years and a budget request of $750,000. Nirja rated this application as very good, Lynn rated it as good, and Cassandra gave it a poor rating. I see that we have some differing perspectives here, so this should be an interesting discussion. Let's begin with Nirja.
Thank you, Jody. This project is a collaboration between the University of Burnt Ends and Brisket Community College. The main objective is to establish community partnerships among 3 regional areas to provide effective food safety outreach and education. The proposed project will develop and deliver region-specific education and training programs to community-based organizations. As far as strengths, I thought this application was interesting and has potential for long-term impacts. The methodology is clear, and the project makes use of existing funding for programs that are already in place. I did note some weaknesses though. The evaluation plan was weak and the application would have been strengthened by including an external evaluator. Some of the documents were missing or were not in correct templates. These missing documents made it difficult to assess the qualifications of the 3 co-PDs.
Let's freeze the panel one more time. Another learning moment. Missing documents make it difficult for panelists to assess important components of the evaluation criteria. Make sure to include all the required documents that are listed in the RFA and use the correct NIFA forms and templates. It is also very important to ensure that all documents are in PDF format. They will not be included in the application package for review if they are not in the PDF format. It is important to check the documents, and perhaps an idea that I myself used in the past as a project director or principal investigator is to actually have someone else that is a little far away from the application check these documents to help you and your team. Unfreeze.
All things considered, this project includes very worthy objectives. I gave a rating of very good.
Thank you, Nirja. Next panelist 2 is Lynn.
Thank you. I agree with some of the points that were mentioned by the first panelist. As a strength, I thought the budget seemed cost effective, and they did use letters, pardon me, of support from most of their collaborators as well. I noticed several weaknesses. There were a lot of typos and grammatical errors, and the narrative was very difficult to follow in some sections. Due to the lack of clarity, I had to reread portions of the application, and it was very time consuming. It seems like they waited to the last minute to complete their application.
Let me freeze the panel for yet another learning moment. Panelists will notice if you waited until the last minute to polish your application. Create a timeline for preparing your application and leave enough time for all collaborators to contribute and review. Use spelling and grammar check and have an experienced and frank colleague proofread your application. Be sure you plan ahead to allow enough time to collaborate with everyone and to collect important additions to your application like letters of support or equipment codes. Coordinating all the moving parts of developing a high quality application takes time, a lot of time and planning. So be sure you're setting yourself up for success. Unfreeze.
This is an interesting project with important goals, but there are many flaws. I've been feeling too generous when I rated this application as good.
Thank you, Lynn. Next panelist 3 is Cassandra.
Thanks, Jody. I have to be honest and say that I was not very impressed with this application. I agree with Lynn that the application had many typos throughout, and the authors included a lot of irrelevant information. I was frustrated with having to reread so many sections, and this application was the 10th one on my list of applications to review. The applicant did not provide sufficient information for me to determine if the project director is qualified to successfully carry out their proposed objectives and to lead their team of 8 collaborators. I see this problem as a major flaw with this application. Their plan to evaluate project outcomes was vague, and the plan to collect outcome data is an important component of the evaluation criteria.
Let's freeze the panel one more time. It is important to review the evaluation criteria in the request for applications before you begin writing the application, and refer to the evaluation criteria as you are writing to make sure you're thoroughly addressing each component. This is similar to consulting a statistician when planning an experiment. We don't do that after we've already started the experiment. We do that before. So this is very similar to that. Unfreeze.
This team was very ambitious, and from the information they included in their application, their objectives did not seem realistic or feasible to me. I'll go ahead and stop there. I gave this application a rating of poor.
Thank you, Cassandra. Any comments from other panelists? Okay, hearing none, this concludes the panel discussion of this application. Let's talk about the placement of the application within the funding category on the ranking board. Nirja, you're a primary panelist for this application. Can you place this on the ranking board, please?
Sure. Although I initially liked this application, after hearing the concerns from other panelists, I have changed my rating to good. I still think the idea has merit, but it will take a lot of work to improve the design. I will place this in the middle of medium category.
Okay, in that case, as a reminder, please make sure you change this rating on your individual written review, and Tammy will make note of it here.
All right. Do others agree with the ranking?
I disagree. This application has many flaws. I will put it in the upper portion of the low category.
Okay, Cassandra, how would you like to rank this application?
Well, I think this application has potential, but it's high risk and it has several major flaws. I agree with Lynn. I think the application should go in the upper portion of the low priority.
Okay, Lynn and Cassandra are suggesting the upper portion of low priority placement of this application. Nirja, do you agree with this placement?
That's okay for me.
Okay, Tammy, please move this application over to the upper portion of low priority. And this concludes the panel review of this application. Let's bring Logan and Pascal back from the waiting room.
Ooh, I needed that break.
Same, I enjoyed the view from my window. Spring was looking promising out there.
But you still didn't bring any snacks back.
Oh, I've got my coffee.
You'll need it. Okay, it looks like everyone is back from the COI waiting rooms. Pascal, I'll hand it back over to you for this next discussion.
Thanks, Jody. The next application to review is application 13415. There are no COIs for this application. The title for this application is New Approaches to Address Impact of Rising Temperatures on Food Security. And the program director is Barry Farmer from University of Bluefields. The panelists assigned to review this application are Adam Wilkie as panelist 1, Cassandra Yui as panelist 2, and Kellyanne Jones-Jamgard as panelist 3. This is a research application with a project period of 4 years and a budget request of $750,000. Adam rated this application as very good, Cassandra rated it as good, and Kellyanne also rated it as good. Let's begin with Adam.
Well, I really liked this application. It was nicely structured, and I had no difficulty in understanding the concepts. The roles of the project director and the co-PD were described in detail, and they complemented each other with the expertise required for this kind of research. My only concern with this project is the timeline for the first objective involving data collection using surveys. They plan to have data collected from 5 sample sources, and this kind of activity might require more time than they planned in their timeline. Since the second and third objectives are dependent on the first objective, I think they should have put more thought into their research design.
I have not frozen the panel for a little while here, so let me freeze them again. The feasibility of proposed objectives should match the proposed timeline and duration of the project. Complex objectives need careful consideration and details should be easily understood. If reviewers have concerns about the execution plans, this may negatively impact the review of your application. Unfreeze.
I have no other concerns with this application, and I rated it as very good.
Thank you, Adam. Next is Cassandra. Please go ahead and share your thoughts.
Thank you. I agree with the first panelist that the application was well structured, but I did have a few concerns. In addition to what Adam has already mentioned about the use of the surveys, I think this team would benefit from adding representatives from community organizations to help administer those surveys in a more timely manner. This type of data collection is not an easy task, and I think expanding their team would help.
Let's freeze for another learning moment here. Including collaborators with relevant expertise and experience for achieving project objectives are crucial for your project. Their expertise can help successfully accomplish complex goals. Additionally, before I unfreeze the panel, there may be substantial survey-related costs that the PDs had not included in the budget, and they have not included a section in their narrative to address potential pitfalls or limitations. And this may lower this survey response rates. So therefore, adding relevant expertise is very important to your proposals. Unfreeze.
Objectives 2 and 3 are well thought out and their approach is novel, but the dependency on this survey makes me concerned about their long-term success of the project. I decided to rate this application as good.
Thank you, Cassandra. Let's hear from the third panelist has to say. Kellyanne, please go ahead.
Thank you, Pascal. Listening to the other panelists, I feel comfortable with my initial thoughts on this application. While it flowed well and was easy to read, I thought they could have done a better job at planning their first objective. I also agree with the concerns about the budget. I rated this application as good.
While I was not a panelist assigned to this application, I read this one because of its importance regarding long-term impacts, and I felt that there were enough details added to their first objective, and it is a well-written application. If budget alignment is a concern, can this panel or NIFA staff put conditions of revising the budget to suit the objectives if this application gets funded?
That's a very good question, Logan. And yes, NIFA staff can request that the PD provide a response to the comments from the panel and a revised budget before funding is finalized.
Thank you, Bob. Let's move on to the ranking. Tammy, can you please display the ranking board? Adam, go ahead and get us started, please.
I think this application has merit and the long-term impacts are valuable. I'd place it in the bottom of high priority.
Thank you. What do you think, Cassandra?
I would feel more comfortable putting it in the medium priority column.
Okay, let's hear from panelist 3. Kellyanne.
I agree with Cassandra. I would put this in medium priority.
Adam, as panelist 1, do you agree with the other 2 panelists?
I would be okay if we place it at the top of medium priority.
Thank you. What about Cassandra? Are you comfortable with that?
I could go with that.
Kellyanne, what do you think?
Even though I have some concerns, I will defer to my colleagues and agree.
Thank you all. Tammy, please put the application at the top of the medium priority. This concludes our panel for today. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to participate.
Pascal, I have a question. You mentioned that we're not allowed to disclose to anyone that we're serving on a NIFA panel before the panel convenes. Now that the panel meeting is over, are we allowed to mention that we've served on this panel?
That's a good question, Cassandra. Panelists can disclose their participation after the panel has met and finished the review. However, they should not disclose the name of the specific program, the specific funding cycle, or the identities of other panelists.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, I would like to thank you all for allowing me to participate in this panel. As a new Extension faculty member, this experience has been invaluable to my professional development, and I learned a lot. I look forward to serving in future panels.
Nirja's comment brings up a great point. The best way to learn about the review process is to serve on a panel. Please consider visiting the NIFA peer review system website, the PRS website, if you would like to volunteer to serve as a peer review panelist for our programs. It's very simple. Just provide your information using the panel panelist recruitment link. Panelists are selected based on their expertise, credentials, and NIFA panel needs at that time. For more information, contact the program staff listed in the request for applications for the program you're interested in serving on. Now, I'll talk about the re-ranking process. After all applications are reviewed for the first time, a re-ranking process is done. This process provides a final opportunity for panelists to decide that all applications are in the proper order based on merit and within the appropriate funding category of outstanding, high, medium, low, or do not fund. After the panel, NIFA makes funding decisions based on the ranking of the applications. Applications must be in a fundable category, then we will fund the applications from the top down in the order of ranking until all available funds are depleted. Let's give a round of applause to all the actors on this panel. As you can see, participating in a panel review process is very worthwhile, and it gives everyone an opportunity to be on the other side of the grant submission process. Please encourage your faculty and staff to volunteer for this important activity, because someone is also volunteering to spend their time reviewing your applications. Before we conclude, here is the cast from today. These are our actual real life, work titles and our roles within USDA's National Institute for Food and Agriculture. Great job, everyone.
So Cal and team, you are much too modest. I totally felt like I was sitting in panel. So thank you very much. And so now we're going to get started with the Q&A session for the mock panel. I want to make another note that some questions that that are posed, they could be complex and nuanced, and so they may require additional research or consultation to ensure accuracy. So in that case, we'll be sure to put the response to those questions in the frequently asked questions document that will be posted on the workshop webpage. So for this session, we have 4 panelists: Dr. Cal Calatara, Dr. Jody Williams, Dr. Mark Mirando, and I believe Joseph Perez as well. So I would ask that you briefly introduce yourself in that order. And Dr. Calatara, I will pass it to you first.
Great. Dr. Shipley, thank you very much for being our host today and for your comments. Thanks also to Dr. Suzanne Sluka, my colleague, Deputy Director, for her welcome comments. So good morning, everybody. My name is Cal Calavacharla, and I serve as a Deputy Director at NIFA and serve as the Deputy Director for the Institute of Youth, Family and Community, IYFC. IYFC has 3 divisions: the Division of Community and Education, which includes the MSIs, tribal colleges and universities, Education and Workforce Development, the Division of Family and Consumer Sciences, and the Division of Youth and 4-H. So with that, thank you.
I believe I'm next. Hi, everyone. My name is Jody Williams. I'm a National Program Leader in Food Safety, and I'm in the Institute of Food Safety and Nutrition.
Am I next, Alicia? So trying to keep that in memory. So good morning, everyone. I am Mark Mirando. I'm National Science Liaison of Animal Production Systems. And before that, I was the National Program Leader of Animal Nutrition Growth and Reproduction. For the past 10 years, I've also served as the Science Coordinator for the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative for NIFA. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Joseph Perez, and I work in the Office of Grants and Financial Management. I am a team leader for the policy branch. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for serving as panelists for this Q&A session. So there have been really great questions posed in the question and answer box. Many have been answered. And so I am going to kind of highlight some of the ones that have been answered. And so panelists, please feel free to clarify or elaborate or highlight any other questions that I may not get to as we go through these. So an attendee did ask, is the review process like an individual review and a panel discussion evaluation? And Suresh did answer that question. And so, yes, there is an individual component where you're reviewing on your own and you submit your written reviews and ratings of the application. And at the panel meeting, you come together like an academic party and you discuss the reviews, and the entire panel helps to rank applications. Another question was, is there a minimum number of panelists required? For example, on one of the slides, there were 2 COIs in the example, and then so only 3 or 4 panelists were left. And so with all NIFA panels, we have at least 3 written panels submitted for each application that do not have a conflict of interest. But there are many more people discussing applications and that are present during the evaluation discussion. There was a question posed about the differences between the NPL, our national program leader, and a program specialist, and Lynn gave a detailed answer on that question. Does anyone else want to chime in on that, the difference between a NPL and a program specialist? Alrighty. So someone asked, what is the number of how many proposals does each panel review, and what's the average number of proposals you receive for a typical funding opportunity? So I wanted to clarify because I answered that question. So generally, we assign about 8 to 12 applications per reviewer. Now, the number of proposals that we receive for a funding opportunity is very disparate. It varies across programs. So it just depended upon the program. And so you could talk with the national program leader about that. Also, is there a minimum number of panelists for, sorry, we answered that one. Is it possible to get examples of funded proposals of closed out projects? And so that question was answered. You can also get a link from the national program leader about funded proposals. They go back about 7 years. And then also a lot of our press releases and NIFA news will have highlights of our projects from different programs. There was a question about how to volunteer to serve on a panel. That link has been pasted in the chat about signing up through our volunteer recruitment database for reviewers. And then there was another question about the discussion, and Jody answered it, and I'll ask you to kind of elaborate on your answer. So why did the last panelist provide input when she did not review the proposal or offer any comments? And that's a very good question. So Dr. Williams.
Sure. So on the first day of panel, all the panelists are allowed access to the full proposals when they don't have a conflict of interest with those proposals. And so oftentimes the panelists will, while the discussion is taking place, or even overnight or before panel, the day of panel, they'll kind of take a look at proposals that are either coming up the next day, just to see a little bit about the discussion, so they have some idea as to what it is that they're going to be discussing, even if it's a proposal that was not assigned to them. And oftentimes there may be questions. One of the comments that were made during the discussion for the panel was that all of the panelists within the panel are not specifically working in that specific topic area, because many of our program areas are pretty broad in terms of expertise. And so a lot of times it's a question. So it's like, oh, well, did they do this? Or why did they choose to do that? And then those discussions that question will either encourage more discussion, or it can just be resolved or answered by one of the individual reviewers who actually read the proposal in depth and provide those individual written reviews. So it creates breadth of discussion, and it provides additional information for those summary reviews.
Thank you very much.
I hope that helps.
Great, excellent answer. I have another question that you answered as well. Or someone else can also chime in on this also. What if there is not consensus between the reviewers on a given application or rating in the assigned categories? What happens in that instance?
So I'll just quickly chime in as to what I stated in the response was that it's actually pretty unusual. Most times we do get consensus. Our panelists tend to be very collegial. There is a lot of great discussion. But in the event that there is not consensus per se, we will bring it to a vote amongst the panelists as to where that proposal should be placed on the ranking board. It is actually not very common. One of our roles as program leaders is to make sure that we encourage the discussion and keep our panelists with an open mind so that we can actually come to consensus, as well as the panel manager also facilitates that process.
Thank you. Right, there was another question about the discussion during the panel. So it is concerning that panelists sometimes make comments during discussions that suggest that proposed work has already been completed by another professor at a different university without providing specific details or references to support their claim. This type of comment can be prejudicial to the proposed application. It is unclear why this behavior is allowed during panel discussions and in the preparation of review summaries for applications. And so, Mark, you provided an answer to this in the Q&A box. Could you provide your thoughts here live with us?
So if it's unverifiable or unsupported information, then it's the panel managers and the NPL's role to prevent that kind of information from creeping into the panel. And it's actually occurs fairly rarely, because once it comes up for early on, the NPLs and panel manager will jump in and stress that the focus of the discussion needs to be on what's in the application and what's in the review criteria. On rare occasions, I've also seen where a person brings this information up and will be able to verify the information by pulling up papers on PubMed. Actually, once one even went to the library before the electronic era and provided the information and documentation to support what they were stating. And this can be done in support of the application or against the application. I've seen it go both ways. So if it's unverifiable, as I said, the NPL and the panel manager will knock that comment down. Leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mirando. I have another question that's kind of connected to the discussion. So the focus of the mock panel included a lot of talk about readability, spelling, and design. One even mentions that is the 10th proposal that they read that day. Should that actually be part of the decision when reviewing grants? I feel like that is inappropriate.
So I'd like to answer this because this comes up all the time. If a reviewer can't read the proposal and understand it, then how are they going to figure out what is being proposed? And that is a fairly common occurrence on proposals. It's poor writing and challenging to read and understand. So if you can't understand a proposal, then how can you really critique it? When you come to spelling mistakes and those kind of errors, when there's lots of them, it gives the reviewer the sense that the same lack of care that's put into proposal preparation will be put into conducting the project itself. You know, I've seen proposals that had a spelling or grammatical error in almost every single sentence throughout, and missing half of paragraphs. And so that is an important component of the overall preparation of the proposal. You got to have great ideas, you have to have great execution, and you have to have great presentation of that information to the panel. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else want to chime in? All right. So I'm going to go to another question. So during the panel discussions, it is not uncommon for panelists to make such statements such as, quote, "I personally like this application," unquote, or unquote, "It is okay for me to have it in medium priority," unquote. However, as someone who has served on 20 panels for different federal and other organizations, I can attest that it can be challenging to eliminate personal biases from the evaluation process. Is it possible to have panelists review applications without knowing the project director or the institution that submitted them? Additionally, do you anticipate the use of artificial intelligence to review applications in the future as a means of reducing bias? And this somewhat goes along with another question that is currently being answered. Is it possible for NIFA to implement a blind review process that removes the names of applicants and their institutions?
So, Dr. Shipley, I'll take a chance at the first part of the question, which was the piece about this is I personally liked it. I think that you had mentioned that. I personally liked the proposal. I think that's where the advantage of having the rest of the panel, in addition to the 3 reviewers who looked at the panel, would come into play. If people have, as we can tell, having served on panels, there's people who take interest in specific proposals and then they go through and review them or read through them, and their opinions kind of can help to identify anything that is missing, or they can add value to the 3 reviewers that worked on it first. The piece about the having a blind panel, I think I'll let I saw Joseph might have been either not nodding or not nodding his head, but there might be. Okay, Mark is going to answer that. That's fine. Yep, that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Cal. Mark?
So this question about anonymizing proposals has come up almost every year since I began working with NIFA more than 22 years ago. And I think it would be a tremendous challenge to try to do that and wipe all that information out. The other issue is that an investigator's qualifications is one of our major review criteria. So it's kind of hard to eliminate that information from an application and then still judge a person's qualification in terms of what's in their publications and what they've done. So I think it's incredibly difficult to do that. The other thing I would suggest is I think it actually has a potential to increase the level of bias, because if you're really knowledgeable in an area, you know what people are working on. And so you'd see a proposal coming in and know who it was, even if it was anonymized. At least I would for probably 30 or 40% of the proposals that come into the programs that I've worked with, just from being knowledgeable in the field. So the reviewers would know, even though the names were taken out, they would know some of the proposals, who some of the proposals were submitted by, but not others. So I think that has a potential to enhance bias. And the final point I'll make is that it's the funding agency's job to minimize all conscious or implicit bias as much as possible. You have to keep in mind that you're taking a very subjective process and trying to make it as objective as possible. It's no different than manuscript reviews or grading term papers at the university level or evaluating job applications. You just try and eliminate bias and exert fairness as much as possible. And I think NIFA and the other funding agencies out there, federal funding agencies, do an excellent job in doing that.
Dr. Shipley, I just want to add that this is another reason why we need more people to serve on our review panels from a diversity of organizations. And you know, the link that is there to sign up as a panelist, I think is really useful. You might not be picked tomorrow, but we'll have your names in our database so that we can actually come back and find appropriate panelists for specific panels. The other piece is that please contact the national program leader that is listed on the RFA if you are interested in serving in a panel, because that will really also help. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. I see that there were some questions that were just answered. I think Dr. Williams answered a question about anecdotal and personal. Okay, how are unpublished data and anecdotal evidence or personal communications used in support of the significance and justification? And I believe you may be trying to say, how are they, utilized or managed by reviewers? Dr. Williams, can you touch on that?
Sure. So as I was reading through it, there's a couple of different ways that question can be interpreted. If the information is submitted as anecdotal information or unpublished data, it can be reviewed and it can be taken into consideration. Of course, published data is stronger in terms of support. And so when you're looking at understanding that your proposal is going to be ranked, the proposal that has the strongest amount of data, the strongest amount of support will outrank that type of data or information. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, that's my comment, which I did not write. When I was originally writing the comment, I assumed that it was like anecdotal or personal communications from the PD, maybe to somebody who happens to be on panel, maybe a colleague or something who happened to be on panel. That did not have a conflict of interest and is now reviewing the proposal. And so what I would state to that is that information should not be brought into the discussion, and that the proposal should be evaluated only based on the information that is provided within the full proposal and not outside of the proposal.
Thank you so much. And kind of segueing into the support piece, and what actually needs to be considered in the panel. And another question was, what aspect in the bio sketch needs particular attention to demonstrate the qualification of a PI and key personnel?
Okay, so I'll take this one, and then either Mark or Cal can follow up. I would say that as it relates to what you're proposing, so publications as it relates to what you're currently proposing. So the idea is that your biosketch or the biosketch of you or your co-PIs or key personnel is to strengthen that they're actually able to accomplish the tasks. So remember, it's a supporting document. So if you've identified a particular key personnel or particular co-PI or yourself and saying that they're going to implement these tasks or they're going to be able to carry out these tasks, their biosketch should be able to support the fact that they'll be able to actually get these tasks accomplished.
Thank you. Mark, did you
I don't have much to add to what Jody said. but it's being able to, it's making it clear in the biosketch that the personnel can do the work. But I wouldn't leave it just to the biosketch. So if you do things routinely in your lab and you cite them, make sure it's clear in a project narrative. So when I used to submit grant proposals, and I had a couple of procedures that were particularly critical to the project success, I'd have statements that I'd say as routinely performed and validated in my laboratory, and then I would cite 4 or 5 papers, and it makes it more challenging for the reviewers to overlook a statement, and particularly when it's pretty critical, because remember, the reviewers are reviewing 10 to 15 proposals, and it's a lot of work to do, and it's a lot to keep track of. So if it's critical, make sure it gets emphasized, whether it's in the biosketch, whether it's in the proposal, whether it's in a separate document about who's going to do what and why on the project. You just want to make it so the reviewers can't overlook something.
Dr. Shipley, I can add also, having served as a PI and written all these grants, is that I think we have to pay attention on whether we're submitting a research grant, a teaching grant, an extension grant, or an integrated grant. And that relevant, as my colleagues have said, that relevant experience needs to be highlighted in that biosketch. Typically, again, I'm at fault at that. The last thing that I look at is my biosketch or something, because I'm focusing on the proposal. But I think it makes sense to have 3 different or 4 different files and then keep updating them with the relevant activities so that can be highlighted when we're submitting the proposal. Just my personal opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cal. I want to also ask you all another question that kind of is sometimes perplexing to an applicant. And the question is, can you comment on a situation where there is a big difference in the outcomes of the review process between 2 years or multiple years? For example, a highly rated proposal initially and then downgraded in a subsequent resubmission after adequately addressing the comments in the panel summary. How often does the panel that reviews a resubmission, not include someone from the previous panel as described in the presentation? I see Mark is coming.
I was going to let somebody else jump in there. So this occurs on occasion because you have a whole new mix of proposals. And you'd like to think that the average quality of proposals, when you're talking about 50, 60, 70 proposals, stays fairly constant from year to year, but that's not necessarily true. Sometimes, some years you just get a large group of newly submitted proposals that are top quality. So it can be the luck of the draw one year versus the next year. Generally speaking, I think most of us at NIFA and other funding agencies try to have people on panel from the previous years. We call it continuity, but that doesn't mean that every single proposal that's resubmitted will have somebody from the previous year on that proposal coming back. Somebody that reviewed it from the previous year is back, because in order to do that, you'd have to have 100% of the panel back. And we don't really want to do that, because you always have to bring in some new people every year, or you wind up with eventually all the experienced people have retired and you have no experienced people and no continuity. So we'd like to have somebody on the proposal reviewing it. Again, from that reviewed the previous year, review it again, but that's not always possible. And so also the comment about revising it adequately is the judgment of the applicant, who is obviously biased, and the reviewers may not think that it's been judged adequately. So again, it's a different mix of reviewers. It's a different mix of proposals, and some years you get lucky and get a reviewer that loves your proposal and is going to champion your proposal and push it up, and maybe it ends up below the funding line but in high priority, and next year you don't have that reviewer and the other reviewers are not as enthusiastic about the proposal. So, and that's why we always put a minimum of 3 reviewers on a proposal, so it's not one person making all the decision or judgment. It's a group of 3 with the rest of the panel able to chime in.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you to all of the panelists, Dr. Cal, Dr. Williams, Dr. Mirando, and Joseph. We appreciate you being on board to answer these questions. There were a lot of great, excellent questions that were posed by attendees, and the questions that we did not get to, as well as the questions that are here, we are going to place them in a frequently asked questions document that will be available soon on the website. There was also a question about closed captioning, and it is on for this session, and a recording will also be available online, and there will be a Spanish translation in captioning as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move to the next session. Thank you all. We're just going to take a few moments to get reorganized. Right, I see that our next group of panelists are here. So if you are just joining us, welcome to day 2 of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture's Grant Support Technical Assistance webinar series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alicia Shipley. I'm a capacity program leader in the Office of the Director, and I will be the moderator for today's session. I'm joined by Narun Nahar, our Zoom host. Our next session will be tips for competitive grant applications. The speakers are Brent Elrod and Dr. Rubella Gumswamy. Please briefly introduce yourself in that order. And Brent, I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon to our attendees. Hope folks find a minute to take a stretch break after the busy morning. A very informative session, and a lot of the questions that were raised in conjunction with today's early session can also inform the conversation that we're going to have with you today. It's my pleasure to join you on behalf of NIFA, where I'm the Science Programs Officer. I've been with the agency since 2008 in various roles, including managing programs and running competitive panels. So it's my pleasure to be able to share some of the tips for competitive grant applications and maybe some of the things you shouldn't do today. So, but again, we welcome your questions. Feel free to use the Q&A as Dr. Goswami and I are speaking, and then we'll also have time for the Q&A session afterwards. But for now, let me hand off to Rubella.
Thank you, Brent. So as Alicia mentioned, I am Rubella Goswami. I am the Director for Plant Protection in the Institute for Food Production and Sustainability. In our presentation today, we will be touching upon and bringing together the expertise from a lot of different backgrounds. If you'd want to go to the next slide, please, Narun. Okay. So before I start off and talk in detail about it, I would like to touch upon our non-discrimination statement. In accordance to the federal civil rights law and the U.S. Department of Agriculture's civil rights regulations and policies, USDA and its agencies, offices, and employees and institutions participating and in administering USDA programs are prohibited from discriminating based on race, color, national origin, or any other form of discrimination. We provide you here with the information that is required for you to put in a complaint if you feel there has been any discrimination that you have faced as part of any of our activities. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So as I was mentioning, today we bring to you information that has come from a combined experience, and it's not only Brent and I, but it's also a lot of our colleagues and even experienced applicants who have shared their experience with us that we have tried to put together in 10 crisp nuggets. A lot of it has been touched upon in the previous presentation that you had as you saw how our panel system works. So this will reiterate on it and strengthen it in addition to providing you some new information. A lot of us at NIFA, just as Suzanne Sluka, our Deputy Director, said in the introduction, have been part of the land-grant university system. We have been applicants ourselves. We have served as awardees. We have been reviewers. We have been panel managers. And at this point, we have either been national program leaders, leading programs, and writing these RFAs, or in administrative roles overseeing all of this. So this comes with ideas from everywhere. And the goal of this particular section is to not only provide information for those who are new and help them navigate the process better and help them be more successful, but also perhaps as a refresher for those who are more experienced in the trade of writing grants. There's always myself, having served in all the different roles that I was mentioning, still learn every time I hear any of these talks about grant writing, because everybody brings a different perspective and every day new situations arise and we learn from them. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, beginning with the abbreviations. RFAs, we've been talking about RFAs, that's request for applications. Sometimes they're called requests for proposals, or both of these are equivalent to maybe program announcements or solicitations or call for proposals. All of these essentially relate to the same thing, where we are requesting you to submit your great ideas and how you will do them, achieve them to us so that we can consider funding them. NIFA is the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and AFRI is our flagship program for funding, which is the Agriculture Food Research Initiative. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, now we go into the nuggets of information that we wanted to share. First and foremost, please find the right program for your idea. The biggest mistake anyone can make is to try to fit a square peg into a round hole. The main purpose of your program, of the program that you are funding, are applying to, should fit your idea. You should try not to be at the fringes, but fit into that. How would you do that, one might ask? Lots of different ways. There are a lot of resources available. You can look at program pages, you can talk to your colleagues, you can attend grant orientations like this, and you can talk with our national program leaders, not only send them emails, ask questions, other than looking at our websites, but they're also there at all the different professional meetings that you're going to. We try to cover, now that we are out of the pandemic, we're doing more and more of these outreach activities. You can see a program leader, a program staff that is available. Talk to them about your ideas and helping you understand the process. In addition to that, make sure that you check the eligibility restrictions. is the program that you really want to apply for, is that something that you would be eligible for, or are there little nuances that might disqualify you after you've gone into the whole process of preparing your proposal? Anytime, we're always ready to answer your questions, either by email or phone, but email in the current situation is probably the preferred method. Just shoot our NPLs an email or one of us, we can direct you in the right path. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I just wanted to share a couple of examples of places where you can find information about the programs. I know there was one question that was raised in our previous session asking where can we know what projects have been funded by a particular program. This information is available in our program pages. Oftentimes, a lot of the funding programs have dedicated program pages where funded projects are linked. The other place where you can find not only the information about specific projects, but you can also do a deep dive search about the institutions that have been funded, even what has been funded in your state, is the NIFA Data Gateway. So you can either use the link on this slide or you can just Google NIFA Data Gateway. And when you go in there, you can do a search, a single search, or hit that search button that will take you to a more bigger enterprise search that has a lot of different options for you to choose from. In this, I wanted to mention this because this is a very good way for you to actually find out what are the sort of things that are getting funded by the specific program. So you're searching by program, or the other side around is I want to work, say, with Alfalfa Weevil, for example. Has NIFA funded projects on them? If they have, what programs are funding them? All this sort of information, and also what are the type of things that those projects do that have been funded, are all available here through the NIFA Data Gateway. Next slide, please. The second thing, we've been talking about RFAs, or requests for application, or requests for proposals, or call for applications, all of those different names that we were talking about. That document is very, very important for you to be fully acquainted with. Even if you are a seasoned grant writer, you may have submitted to the same program for many years. Often we have changes. There might seem like there are little changes, but they may affect the way you are looking at your things or how your proposal is considered. So please, please, please take the time to go through the RFA. The other thing which NIFA is doing, it has done in the past, we are doing it even more now, is providing technical assistance webinars. So these are webinars about the specific programs done soon after the RFAs are released. So these webinars are the places for you to ask questions to the NPLs if you haven't contacted them personally, and also to learn about the different programs that are there. While talking about webinars, I'll also pitch in here that if you have not signed up for, please try to sign up for the NIFA updates. Those updates will provide you the information for the RFAs that have been released and when the webinars are, and things of that sort. You can choose by the things you want to receive, how often you can receive them, the different aspects of that. Understand the instructions in the RFA and how to assemble the proposal. So again, make a to-do list for you as you go through the RFA, check mark, put your questions together, please read through it. Next slide, please. Linked to reading the RFA, the next step for you should be to try to prepare a timeline for a proposal. We emphasize this because, believe me, almost every week I get a few requests for late submissions for allowance, and a deadline is a deadline is a deadline. Unless there is a natural disaster or there is a major outage of grants.gov, which we get to know at the exact timeline of your submission, we cannot extend deadlines. So please plan in advance. Develop a timeline that takes into account not only your writing your proposal, but also how much time it takes for the proposal to be processed by your sponsored programs. So we suggest thinking about 4 weeks, having the proposal ready about 4 weeks before the submission deadline so that you don't have to rush through it. It also gives time for others to review it and for you to work through all the kinks and make sure you have all the details that is required for the submission process. Next slide, please. The other thing, and this again was mentioned quite a bit when we were looking at the mock panel before this, is the evaluation criteria. As you are preparing your proposal, make sure you look at the evaluation criteria very well. In fact, look at them before you start writing, because you need to understand what you will be evaluated on and make sure that those are the things that you address for sure in your proposal. So these evaluation criteria, most of our RFAs have the evaluation criteria in them. So please take a little time and read through those criteria. And again, any questions you have, you can reach out to our NPLs. Next slide, please. So those of you who heard the previous portion and saw the mock panel heard this, that our reviewers do get quite a few proposals. We try to average about 10 to 12 proposals per reviewer. So that means they have a fairly decent workload to go through. So the easier you make it for your panelists or for your reviewers to understand your proposal and read through it, the better it is. Also, the other thing that we would want to emphasize here is that you need to make sure that all the things that are required in the RFA, the format that is required in the RFA, is followed in the writing. So when you're understanding the review process, in our review process, typically, we have the grant submission, they come together. Then after the grants are submitted on the other side, we assemble a panel of experts in that particular area. Each expert receives about 10 to 12 grant applications. Each grant application is generally reviewed by about 3 reviewers, sometimes 4 or more, depending on certain programs or how specific they are. And then they put in their reviews, their recommendations, and the ranking is done, and that's how the funding process happens. So as you are putting your proposal together, put it in writing very logically, and touching upon all the evaluation points becomes very important. The other thing I like to say sometimes is in certain panels, and this becomes more important in my experience for panels that are broader, you may have 1 or 2 reviewers who are not directly experts in that specific subject that you are talking. So for example, I work a lot with pest management, with integrated pest management. So if there is a proposal that comes in for integrated pest management that is dealing with managing a pathogen, for example, so we may have 2 pathologists, and we may have 1 person who is not directly a pathologist, is more of an extension specialist or looking at the larger field, also reading the proposal. So what this means is this person is a scientist who can assess what you're doing, but they also need to be able to understand the way it is written. So one comment that came in the RFA our mock panel that was there is, don't make it too dense, make it easy to read. That's the point that I'm trying to explain here or point out to you, is write it such that it can be read by whoever, anyone informed in the subject can understand it while touching upon the main points that you want to address. With that, I think I'll pass it over to Brent for the rest of the tips.
Thank you, Rebella. And I've been looking behind the scenes. We saw the request for the closed captioning. Looks like the hosts are trying to find the access. It was previously set associated with the recording, but they're working on that. Hopefully that can be resolved. So again, thank you. I'm Brent Elrod, the Science Programs Officer for NIFA. My pleasure to be with you today. So far, listening to Rebella, There's not a whole lot of surprises in this presentation, right? It's goes back to the basics to read the RFA fully from beginning to end, follow the instructions, identify the evaluation criteria, and put forward your best foot, and allow enough time to get your quality proposal submitted. So I'm going to basically reinforce some of those points with the additional slides. And this first one here and says to write the proposal logically and clearly and organize it according to the outline in the RFA or the evaluation criteria, whichever makes the most sense based upon your idea and what you're seeking to convey to reviewers. But again, this is a repeated note, and we'll probably say it a couple more times. Following the prescribed format helps the reviewers find the information more easily, especially when they're going back and assessing your proposal against those evaluation criteria, to be able to follow the headings, clearly identify that information within your proposal, helps them to ensure that, yes, you have indicated that you understand it, you have a response, and you have identified that clearly in the material that you are presenting. Next slide, please. We also saw examples of this identified in the reviews in the mock panel earlier. And I just do want to reinforce again, that was a snapshot of kind of a generic panel. The panels are much more in depth. The instructions that are given to reviewers are clearly articulated in advance of receiving proposals for review, and then again upon delivery of the proposals, so that folks fully understand what their responsibilities are and the seriousness to provide a fair, independent, and impartial review. So those were, some examples that were kind of drawn around the edges so that we could make the points, but be assured that we are giving clear guidance as NIFA staff to program reviewers to help us assess the proposals and the quality. Part of that is preparing a budget that includes a strong justification. You see the bullets there, sub-bullets that say unreasonable budgets can weaken proposals. That can create some skepticism among reviewers. And also we want to make sure that budgets are kept within guidelines. First and foremost, if your budget exceeds the allowable amount, it can be disqualified without review. So that's one of those fatal flaws that can really, after putting in a lot of work, can get you disqualified from the actual review process. So if it does make it into review, make sure that the numbers add up. And this is where, again, maybe you are have the science technical expertise, but you're working with your Office of Sponsored Research on the budget numbers. Be sure to go back and cross-check one another's work to ensure that the numbers add up and they correspond to the categories that are on the budget form, as well as included in the budget narrative. It also helps to understand what are allowable and unallowable costs. The RFA will provide those, and the policy guidance associated with the application will also help to explain those. Should you still have questions as you're putting together a budget, reach out to the program lead and or the associated Office of Grants Financial Management lead, which the program person can connect you to if we're not able to answer the question for you directly. Next slide. This is a really helpful one. And I saw a couple of the questions that came in talking about, is the process the same for small business innovation research as it is for AFRI or other competitive programs? And generally, yes, we want to make sure that it's a fair, independent review and that we have subject matter technical expertise that matches up with that of the requested topic area in that particular program, as well as others. What I do caution is when you do seek input for somebody potentially to read and critique your proposal against the evaluation criteria, is that you get somebody that is trusted and you are especially sure is going to protect any proprietary information that you have included in that proposal. This is especially true for our small businesses that may be seeking to patent, trademark particular information. And so you want to make sure that the folks that you do ask to review are trusted. Similarly, when we get reviewers, they're required to sign confidentiality pieces of documentation. So we ensure then that any information shared is going to be held in confidence by the reviewers and by the NIFA staff. Don't get somebody who's your best friend who's going to tell you how much they love it and what a great idea it is. Instead, find that person who is going to offer you good, direct advice about how to strengthen and improve the proposal. If that person finds issues and errors, you can be sure that the reviewers are also going to find those same issues and errors, and maybe others. And so it doesn't hurt to get an early critique, and then as you're ready to submit a proposal to get a final review, because even then you're going to find ways to strengthen that proposal based upon the feedback that you receive. If that person has had success in getting funding from NIFA in similar programs, all the better, because that experience is going to allow them to also kind of foreshadow or predict what issues might be identified by the reviewers based upon their own experience. Next slide, please. This is very basic, but always worthy of reminding. Filling out the forms completely and correctly will ensure that it moves forward past the initial screening into program review. And then it also allows us to cross-check the information in the proposal narrative with what's included in the forms. The current pending support form is one of the ones that's highlighted there, as well as the conflict of interest list. Bibliographies and references cited is another. It's really important that you give those the same scrutiny and attention that you do to your proposal narrative, and that the information aligns. We want to know all of the grants that you're currently working on or have proposed, so that we can ensure then that you've got the adequate time for the project director and other co-PIs to be able to effectively manage this award should it be received. Next slide. This was identified in the earlier mock panel. Sometimes reviewers will benefit from having tables and figures that illustrate the important points, potentially focus the attention, and gives you another way to depict the information that you're trying to convey. In this case, that also can help to kind of bridge where you're writing for both an expert and a novice by being able to reinforce information for somebody that may be new to the subject matter, and also then to drill down for that expert so that they can fully understand that you grasp the depth and breadth of the work that you're potentially proposing, whether it's in research, teaching, or outreach. So that can be a difficult task, right? But again, I think when we go back to the previous slide, that's kind of the piece where if you've got multiple folks that you trust that you can ask to assess your proposal, get somebody with that really aligned, direct technical expertise, and then get somebody maybe that's outside of your immediate field and has to, look at that proposal from that angle. And both of them can kind of give constructive feedback that may be different, but equally beneficial. Next slide. So we're going to share a few final thoughts before we open it up more broadly to the Q&A. Proposal should not be a mystery novel. In other words, we want to make sure that the information is readily available, speaks to the evaluation criteria, can be clearly understood by reviewers. That's going to increase the likelihood of a higher rated review. Getting to the point quickly, clearly, concisely, and logically is easier said in that bullet than done, especially when you've got that broad subject matter expertise. You may just know it, but it's not as directly conveyed in short, concise sentences that reviewers can also grasp. So stating that clearly in terms of what the problem is in a first sentence helps to chart the course for a more clear, concise proposal. Next slide. And so these words repeat a lot. You want to make your proposal compelling. It needs to be clear, concise, and then not only the narrative, but all of the components within that proposal need to be complete. As we kind of tried to demonstrate in the mock panel, these are highly competitive. I don't know that we talked about funding rates for any of our panels, but somewhere in that 15 to 25% average range, I think, especially for AFRI, is probably fair. So that means 1 out of 4 at best is likely to get awarded, and means 75% or higher are going to be declined and potentially being asked to resubmit again if they are really strong proposals. So it's critical that you put your absolute best foot forward to have that chance to be funded. But it also means that this is a process, and that as a proposal writer, you should take a long view approach. In other words, go in with an open mind, be receptive to constructive critique, and then be prepared to come back even better and stronger in a resubmission should you get reviewer comments that point to areas in the proposal that could be further strengthened. Next slide. And so one of the best ways to do this, as Cal and others said in the mock panel, is by volunteering to become a panelist. It can be intimidating at first if you're new faculty, new to this process, but I can assure you that the viewpoints are going to be received and valued as you bring your own expertise. I saw a couple of the in the question and answer about looking for reviewers that may be outside the academic community. And we do that in the programs where it is best fit. One of those is beginning farmer rancher development program. So we almost always have reviewers that have direct experience as an ag producer, as a farmer or rancher, to serve on those panels. Another is enhancing agricultural opportunities for military veterans. We not only look for the experience with agriculture, but in that particular instance, those that understand what it means to be a military service member and a veteran of the armed forces. So those are just examples, but in most instances, we are going to cast a broad and wide net for reviewers. So put your name forward. The information was shared. You can scan that QR code. You can go directly to the PRS page or that link that's listed there to be able to register your information. I'll just note that registration does not mean that you will automatically be selected for a panelist. We use multiple criteria in putting a panel together, not just the subject matter expertise, but also their where they might live in the country, so that we have geographic diversity. We want gender diversity, race and ethnic diversity. We want to be able to have diversity of education and experience. So the multiple pieces then will help determine what that final panel looks like. And again, one of the ways to increase the chances is, again, to match your expertise to the specific program and to reach out directly to the program leader when you see an RFA announced that you are not going to submit a proposal to, but are interested in learning more about, and you've got related expertise. Reach out to that program lead and directly express your interest, and that can help them potentially identify you for the pool for that particular panel. Again, does not mean you'll be selected. It doesn't mean that it is a knock against you as an individual or your experience. It just means that you may not have been the perfect fit at that time for that particular program. Next slide. I think that concludes our shared remarks. And now we're happy to answer questions that may have already been dropped in the Q&A or others that you might have. Thank you to our sign language interpreters, and also for those behind the scenes that got the closed captioning working about midway through. And I'll hand it back to our moderator, Dr. Shipley.
Thank you all so much. Now we're going to get started with the Q&A session. Joseph Perez will also be joining Dr. Rubella and Brent for this session. We've already received a lot of great questions for this session. You all provided such helpful information to potential and future applicants. So some of the questions have been answered, but I'm just going to go back through the ones that are open right now. So our first question is, are there unwritten guidelines for budgets?
I can get it started. I think this is where it's really important, again, depending on where the potential project director resides. So in terms of, are they with a non-governmental organization? Do they have a CFO that they potentially can consult? Are they with a land-grant university where they can work in coordination with their Office of Sponsored Research? Are they a small business where they also have dedicated accountant? I think those are the pieces that are really going to be helpful to ensure that you put together a good budget. The piece, again, where you are putting together potentially a proposal design around research, is that going to be basic research or integrated research? Do you need lab cost associated if it's basic research? If it's integrated, have you thought through what the actual cost of the education and or outreach component of that will be? So I don't know that there's unwritten guidelines, but there's a lot to include. And this is where having faculty and others that have been successful in putting proposals together as resources to you is one approach that you could take. And then I'll ask Rubella to share any other ideas.
Sure, Brent. The other thing that I would like to touch on, like Brent said, is make sure you talk to everybody that's involved in the proposal. Oftentimes we get for integrated projects, particularly if you have extension involved, as a faculty, if you are on the research side and not as aware of how much it takes to run a field trial, for example, make sure you communicate with your extension partners. In fact, in my experience as an applicant, the easiest way is right in the beginning, as you are planning your grant, bring everybody together and make sure they are the ones who can give you the estimate of how it's going to be, how much it's going to take to actually do the trial. So make those connections in the beginning as you're planning to put that together. And as again, Brent said, as it will depend upon what proposal, what you're planning to do, where in the country you're doing it, what are the situations, multiple things, and that can only be addressed by having all the players on board. Any other comments on that? Anybody else wants to add anything?
Thank you so much. So we did have a few questions about feedback that panel or applicants would seek to receive. So one question focuses on the feedback not being adequate from the panelists. And the question is it possible to provide the applicant with feedback from both the reviewer and the program manager to help them better understand the reasons for their application not being funded and how they can improve it for future submissions? No, Suresh gave an answer to that. If you all would like to elaborate, that'd be great.
Rubella, you want to get us started?
Yeah, sure. So in addition to the reviewer's comments that you get back, we are always open for you to set up a time to speak with the national program leader, and they are present during the panel, and they could probably help you get a little bit more insight and also talk about things in terms of fit to the program or how you might improve things. So that's one aspect of it. And in certain cases, I think Suresh mentioned it, is if it's an all excellent proposal, unfortunately, we do not have the funds always to fund everything that we would like to. So it may be in certain cases that everything is really good about the proposal, but we just ran at the end of the funding line and we didn't have enough funds to put that together.
Thank you. Another question connected to that.
Hey, Alicia, I see Mark's hand up. You might want to add to that.
I can't see, sorry, thank you.
So I just emphasize what Rubella said, and at NIFA and other agencies, we're here to answer questions. So most of the program leaders take very detailed notes during a panel discussion and can use those notes to supplement what's in the panel summary. In fact, I use them to help edit the panel summaries for clarity, but sometimes there's subtleties in those notes. So we'd encourage you to reach out to the NPL. I've probably already had 30 to 40% of applicants for one program contact me, and we've already been through those discussions and consultations. So we're here to help. We're here to provide additional advice and input.
Thank you so much, Mark. Another question is concerning feedback. And the attendee asked, can we receive feedback on where the application was ranked and what the funding cutoff was?
Since
Mark,
Mark has his hands up, go ahead. Then we can add.
Well, that was a legacy hand, but should receive that in terms of the review package to PD, which should include a cover letter, panel summary, individual reviews, and what we refer to as a relative ranking form. And so that relative ranking will have the proposals proportioned or allotted to the different ranking categories. What percentage of proposals were ranked in outstanding, what percentage were ranked in high priority, medium priority, low priority, and do not fund. And it will indicate not necessarily a numerical ranking of your proposal, but it will indicate what category your proposal was ranked in or rated in. So whether it was placed in high priority or medium priority or wherever. So that should be included in the review package to PD. And if it's not, I think you should ask the question. It's a valid question to ask the program leader. Exactly where it's placed in medium priority or high priority, you may not get that information. You may get a generalities provided, like it's in the upper half of medium or in the bottom half of high priority. But the general position should be provided to you, because I think that's critical for determining whether, along with the tenor of the panel summary, I think that information is critical for determining whether you're going to spend the time to revise and resubmit.
Thank you, Mark. I did have another question. We had about 2 or 3 questions that focused on implicit bias and unconscious bias training. Specifically, one of the questions was, could NIFA require panelists to complete online training modules specifically designed to address unconscious bias and emphasize the significance of objectivity in the review process in order to minimize any potential biases? Certain universities receive funding over and over again. I live in the South, and when I see the distribution of funding, I'm alarmed that Southern colleges and organizations do not receive funding. I'm not sure if organizations or colleges are not submitting or if it's something else. Anyone like to touch on that?
Brent, do you want to start on it and then I can add?
So Mark may also come back on camera too for what's in the latest training package for panel managers, that we could start there.
So, yeah, thanks, Brent. Training module on avoiding on implicit bias and avoiding implicit bias or conscious bias, explicit bias, that is provided to all the panel managers. And that training is also provided to the individual reviewers. So we take them through that implicit and explicit bias training, and the need for avoiding that type of bias or during a panel review. And we've been doing that for about 5 years now. So it's not something that we only newly started, but it's now required across the agency for all our panels. The other way we try to avoid bias is having fairly large and very diverse panels with different comprised of people from different backgrounds, different viewpoints, different types of institutions, large institutions, small institutions, minority serving institutions, nonprofits, the private sector. So that's how we address the bias issues. Brent?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'll just also note that for everyone's benefit, that NIFA staff also are required to take this training, and that we have a number of other initiatives underway to ensure, again, that we are demonstrating and upholding the diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility principles of this department, our administration. So not just the unconscious bias piece, but looking more broadly in terms of what we can continue to do to be a representative workforce for the taxpayers of this country.
Yeah, and just to be specific, in addition to all the trainings, we make sure that in our pre-panel orientation and even just before they go into panel and start talking about proposals, that we remind them about these biases and reiterate this again and again throughout the process.
And I see a comment that just came in that somebody says that they participate in panels where that's not occurred. If you could reach out to one of us directly and speak to us, would appreciate that. Our emails included on the slides.
Thank you, Brent, Rebella, and Joseph for this panel. Now we're going to transition to the open session Q&A. And so I'll bring back all of the panelists for today. So Dr. Cal Calavachara, Dr. Jody Williams, Dr. Mark Mirando, Brent, Rebella, and Joseph as well. And so now attendees feel free to add questions that you still have in the question and answer box. And please remember that I just want to make a note that some questions posed may be complex and nuanced, and they may require additional research and consultation to ensure accuracy. So in that case, we'll be sure to put those responses in the frequently asked questions document that will be posted on the workshop webpage. So I did want to start off with one question. So it is about resubmissions. So is it better to submit the proposal as a new application instead of a resubmission if we could slightly change the proposal title and some of the objectives?
Well, Dr. Shipley, I can at least attempt that question, having served as a PD. I think that's a decision that the PD has to make with regards to is it significant changes that are required based on the review that was provided to the objectives and whether the objectives can stand by themselves or they're codependent on each other and so on and so forth, or if it is just slight modification that is required. I also saw another question earlier on about response to reviews, and I was going to answer that as well. Usually in what I've done myself is to have used the beginning of the proposal to respond to prior reviews. I've done that for NIFA, I've done that for NSF and other agencies, and that has actually been useful to bring together the concerns that the previous panel had and how to and to respond to that. But I'll stop there. I think that's a decision. The resubmission or new submission is a decision that the PD will have to make based on the content of the review. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cal. Did anyone else want to add anything? Dr. Williams?
Sure, I'll also add, you do get 1 page to respond to previous reviewers' comments. So that's in addition to your project narrative, that's the number of pages in your project narrative that's outlined in the request for application. So really just kind of take a look at weighing what Cal just shared with you, as well as the opportunity to provide an additional page.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask the next question, which I think it's fairly clear. If a proposal is clear for the panelists to answer. If a proposal has been placed in the do not fund category, but with a medium rating overall, does it make sense for the proposal to be submitted in the following year? And I see, Mark, that you are providing a response to that. Feel free to chime in.
Okay, since you called on me while I was typing that answer up, I'm not sure how a proposal could have be ranked in do not fund and have a medium rating, because that kind of sounds like medium priority rating, which is 2 categories higher than do not fund. So our ranking categories from the top to the bottom are outstanding, high priority, medium priority, low priority, and do not fund. Regardless, whether to resubmit or not, you really need to look carefully at the individual reviews and especially the panel summary, and look for words like, are the panelists saying it's meritorious, or they have a lot of enthusiasm, or are they saying they have very limited enthusiasm? So these kind of words will clue you into whether it's worth resubmitting or not. And if you're in doubt, I would contact the program leader and ask the question point blank. My response to people submitting the first time, my canned response is everything in medium priority is generally worth a resubmission, at least 1 resubmission. Whether it's worth a second depends on how the second panel receives it. But generally, a proposal down at that far end of do not fund needs an awful lot of work for it to move very much during the next submission and review cycle. So I think you need, for the amount of time that it takes to put these proposals together, on the order of 2 to 3 months of actual time, that it's a carefully thought out decision on whether to resubmit or not.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. So I want to make sure we highlight, even though I see Suresh is responding to one of the questions in the Q&A box. This is about small business, and I want to make sure we highlight it because this whole grants workshop is not only focused on universities and institutions of higher education, but also nonprofits, small businesses, and different types of organizations, because we do have a diversity of eligibility that's reflected across our grant programs. So the question is, this workshop, both today and yesterday, has focused on guiding university and academic aspiring grant writers. The presentation narrative have given some footnotes for business owners. Are there any specific resources for entrepreneurial business owners should be aware of as we participate for funding along with large, well-funded organizations?
This is Brett. I can get us started. I would encourage any small business to, go to the Small Business Administration website. Also to look at their small business development groups that may be in their communities, counties, or states. Those are usually tremendous resources to help small businesses that have research ideas that they potentially want to bring to our small business innovation research program. They can also often provide technical assistance to those aspiring entrepreneurs. Those small business qualifications are under 500 employees, so they can range from 1 employee to about 499. So again, depending on where you're at on that scale, the level of support by that Small Business Development Center could differ as well. So I'll pause there. Jody, you also helped oversee the food safety topic within SBIR. What else do you have to add?
Sure. I was just going to follow up and say that tomorrow they're going to present on the Small Business Innovation Research Overview. And I think, yep, great. Narun just put that in the chat. And so they're going to give some additional insights there as well. But also a lot of the same tips that we have been providing for academia and larger institutions do apply for small businesses, specifically when we're talking about the information that's provided in your project narrative, identifying your key personnel, your partners who you're working with. Those are all very relevant to applications that are coming in for small businesses, be that nonprofits and non-governmental organizations working with communities, or small businesses working or doing research directly. So it's still very relevant, identifying the appropriate partners and key personnel, as well as making sure that your project narrative is succinct and provides all the information that folks need in order to provide an adequate review of your proposal without a lot of gaps. So just keep in mind that the same tips and tools really do still apply for small businesses that also apply for these academic type programs.
Thank you. There's another question I think would be great for the national program leaders. Empirically, could the program leaders comment on the application length and success of the application? Some RFAs suggest 12 to 18 pages. While we don't want to burden the reviewers or write dense applications, is being concise a successful strategy?
So I'll chime in, and then anyone else who wants to jump in after that can help. So concise meaning that you're clear, not concise necessarily meaning that you're brief. Based on the programs, there's a certain amount of pages that are allocated because that's more than likely what's necessary in order to get your point across in terms of your project narrative and your overall goals of your work. And so if it's too brief, you probably don't have enough information. A couple pages short, okay. But if it's, half of what we've proposed, it probably doesn't have enough information. Mark, you've been doing this a little bit longer than me. You may have some additional insight as well.
Okay, I guess that means I just look a lot older than you, which I know I am. But yeah, I agree with Jody. There's a balance between being concise and being too brief. You don't want to be overly redundant, and in doing so, take the application unnecessarily to the full 18-page limit with no white space or figures or tables. but sometimes you do need some redundancy on critical points like the hypothesis, right? Getting the hypothesis across. So a couple pages short of the 18-page limit or whatever the limit is not gonna hurt you. But if it's 1/3 the limit, you probably are leaving out information. I've never heard a panelist say, oh, they had 2 more pages, and they didn't use it. I have heard them say they have several pages of left, and they could have used that to include information that they left out. And there's a difference between those two things.
So also just to chime in here, totally agree with what Jody and Mark had said. And when we are talking of dense, the other thing is just think of it from a reader's perspective and how to communicate your writing clearly. So charts, diagrams, sometimes flow charts, trying to help understand the process, really make it more readable, more understandable. So think of those in those terms, and also to keep it, making it so brief that you're not addressing things that are required to evaluate the proposal properly is also a risk that you may run. So just balancing those, and that's why we say that it's nice to have someone else also read your proposal. Sometimes you understand what you are writing because that's all clear in your head, but having someone outside read it actually makes that difference.
Thank you so much. Let's see here. This is another question that connects to the page limit question. Are proposals that are over the page limit automatically excluded from the review?
Yes. No more, no less. Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. They are automatically excluded.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And then another question that we had, and I think this is important just for everyone's own education. So can you provide information on NIFA's plans for allocating funds in the future and which focus areas may receive increased funding?
I get it started and then I'll hand.
Come off mute.
Yeah, I see there. So I'll get it started and then I'll hand off to Mark. Priorities are driven by the budget appropriations process, as well as the priorities as established in the Farm Bill. And so the president puts forth the budget that then Congress appropriates. And those often include directions for us in terms of where and at what amounts our funding is to be released at. So that's the kind of the big picture. Mark, in terms of AFRI, you want to drill down?
Sure. Thank you, Brent. So as Brent said, a lot of this is driven by whatever the current administration's priorities are. And they are also driven by, in the case of the grant programs, what Congress has authorized NIFA to do in those different programs. So in AFRI, Congress has authorized AFRI NIFA to do work in 6 priority areas. We call them the Farm Bill priority areas. That's plant health and production, animal health and production and animal products, food safety, nutrition and health, bioenergy, natural resources and environment, ag, systems and technology, and agriculture, economics, and rural communities. If I can remember those off the top of my head. So so it means doing allocating funds that are going to address the authorization, meet the priorities of the administration, and also address the needs of the stakeholders. That's the third piece that we haven't really talked about. So we're not getting huge funding increases. In AFRI, it's been about $10 million a year for the past several years. It sounds like a lot of money, but 10 million, we're up to 455 million. So there's not a lot of room for growth of programs. And if some programs are going to grow a lot, that means other programs either need to retract or be sunset or be redirected in a different area. So, so it's a complex process. I'll just give you an example since Brent mentioned the administration's priorities. It's obvious that one of the priorities is climate change. And so if you look at the AFRI Foundational and Applied Science program, you will see that there are some new programs that were put in the recent past that focus very much on climate change. And then if you look through all the existing programs that were already in there, you'll see increased emphasis in many, if not most of them, on work on climate change to not dramatically change the program, but try to recruit more relevant applications in that area that's a priority for the administration. So that's about the best I can answer. Maybe Cal would like to, being one of the deputy directors, and in this case, for the Institute of Youth, Family, and Communities, wants to address priorities from that perspective.
Mark, I don't have anything else to add to that. You said it correctly. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that expert answer. And we just, there's one more question that I want to, Brent.
Yeah, thanks. I was starting to try and type a response and hit the wrong button. So I got rid of the message. I just want to make sure that folks, that the question was, is it helpful to include photos of stakeholders in the proposal? And the answer is no. It's better to be able to describe the expertise and the collaboration, what roles the stakeholders or project directors are going to have, as opposed, we would prefer not to have images included.
Thank you. There were several questions asked about the recording and the postings online for today's sessions. Nirja, could you make a comment really quickly on when and where those recordings and resources will be posted?
Yeah, sure, Alicia. Before I do that, I do want to address one question, since a lot of people asked that they volunteered to be panelists but were not selected. My request to you is, if you're applying to be a panelist and you have submitted your application, please let the program staff know, because it's a common portal, and so nobody gets notified that you have applied. If you let the program staff know, they will know and definitely reach out to you. Regarding the recordings, we have provided links to the pages for each day where you find the supplemental materials, recordings when they're ready. We have to provide captioning, so it takes a little bit of time. By next week, all the recordings will be posted. As we go through each day and recordings are ready, we'll try to post as they come, but our aim is to post them as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Nirja. And thank you to all of our panelists and presenters, as well as all of the attendees today. We certainly hope that you found this information beneficial as you start or continue your journey to obtain funding with NIFA. So have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow on day 3, where we are covering competitive funding opportunities. Thank you very much, everyone.